Well, prosecutors say 14 current and former officers, including sheriffs and police chiefs, were arrested in one of the largest corruption sweeps in Mississippi history.
Investigators say officers used marked police vehicles and flashing lights to escort cartel cocaine shipments along Highway 61, taking thousands in bribes.
March 8, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Highway 61 cuts through the Mississippi Delta like a scar. It runs straight and flat through cotton fields, through small towns that time forgot, through counties where the sheriff's word is still the law and where strangers don't ask too many questions. On the night of March 8, 2023, a convoy moved south along that highway. At the front and rear of the convoy, marked law enforcement vehicles with flashing lights cleared the road. Inside the escort vehicles, uniformed officers, deputies, people who had sworn an oath to protect the public. In the vehicle between them, 25 kilograms of cocaine being transported for what those officers believed was a Mexican drug cartel. The officers were not being coerced. They were not acting under duress. They had been paid, and they would be paid again twice more over the next 16 months before the FBI closed the trap. What happened in the Mississippi Delta between 2023 and 2025 is one of the most disturbing law enforcement corruption cases in American history, not because of the scale alone, though the scale is staggering, but because of who was involved: sheriffs, police chiefs, deputies, people with badges, people with authority, people who looked their communities in the eye every single day while escorting cartel cocaine down the highway at night. This is their story, and this is how the FBI brought them down. If you just found this channel, welcome to Pride of America. We cover the cases that the mainstream media buries, the corruption that powerful people hope you never see. Hit subscribe right now and join hundreds of thousands of Americans who refuse to look away. Every week, a new case. Every week, the truth. Subscribe. The counties at the heart of this case rank among the lowest in the nation for income, educational attainment, and access to health care. They are also counties where law enforcement has historically operated with minimal outside oversight, small departments, limited resources, sheriff's offices where the elected official has nearly unchecked authority over how the department runs, who gets investigated, and who gets left alone. For decades, federal investigators had received sporadic complaints about corruption in Delta law enforcement, allegations of evidence tampering, rumors of drug dealers paying for protection, tips that never quite solidified into cases. In 2022, everything changed. Arrested drug dealers, facing serious federal time, began telling investigators the same thing independently. If you want to move product through the Delta, you pay the cops, not some of them, the ones at the top. The FBI's Jackson field office began building a sting operation. It would run for 2.5 years, and when it concluded, it would take down officers from 10 separate law enforcement agencies in one of the largest public corruption sweeps in Mississippi history. March 2023, October 2024. The operation was methodical. FBI undercover agents posed as members of a Mexican drug cartel seeking reliable law enforcement protection for cocaine shipments moving through the Delta corridor and into Memphis, Tennessee. The pitch was simple: provide armed escort for the shipments, keep the road clear, make sure no one stops the vehicles, and get paid. The cartel, as far as the officers knew, needed protection from rival law enforcement. They were being asked to use their badges as shields for drug trafficking. They said yes. The first escort operation took place on March 8, 2023. Officers from multiple agencies provided armed convoy protection along Highway 61 for what they believed was a cocaine shipment. The FBI documented everything: vehicles, faces, radio communications, payment exchanges. The second operation ran on October 5, 2023. Officers again provided escort, this time for what they understood to be drug trafficking proceeds being transported out of the Delta. The third and fourth operations took place in March and July 2024. By this point, investigators had documented officers making trips to Miami to meet with undercover agents, conduct negotiations, and collect advance payments. Some officers flew down on their own dime. Some billed the trip as department business. All of it was captured on surveillance. Between operations, the undercover agents cultivated relationships. Officers were wined and dined. Bribes ranged from a few $1,000s for lower-ranking participants to $37,000 for senior officers. Every payment was documented. Every conversation was recorded. By October 2024, the FBI had what federal prosecutors called an airtight case. Built October 30, 2025, federal indictments unsealed. When the indictments were unsealed at a federal courthouse in Oxford, Mississippi, the list of names stopped the room. Washington County Sheriff Milton Gaston, the elected top law enforcement officer for an entire county, was among those charged. Humphreys County Sheriff Bruce Williams, another sitting elected sheriff, was arrested the same morning. Sunflower County Chief Deputy Marvin Flowers was taken into custody before dawn. In total, 14 current and former law enforcement officers, plus 6 civilian co-conspirators, 20 people charged across multiple indictments. The agencies read like a directory of Delta law enforcement: the Mississippi Highway Patrol, the Hollandale Police Department, the Humphreys County Sheriff's Department, the Metcalfe Police Department, the Washington County Sheriff's Department, the Sunflower County Sheriff's Department, the Yazoo City Police Department, the Believer County Sheriff's Department, the Greenwood Police Department, and the Greenville Police Department. 10 agencies, multiple counties, a corruption network that, as U.S. Attorney Clay Joyner said at the press conference that morning, permeated all levels and extended across multiple counties and multiple jurisdictions. Of the 20 individuals charged, 19 faced counts of illegally carrying a firearm in relation to a drug trafficking crime. Their badges had not just been sold, they had been carried. We are halfway through one of the most jaw-dropping corruption cases this country has ever seen, and it gets worse. Before we get to the takedown, make sure you're subscribed to Pride of America. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told in full, without spin, without agenda, just the facts and the fire. Subscribe right now and share this video. The more Americans see this, the better. October 30th, 2025, 5 a.m. The arrest operation was coordinated across multiple counties simultaneously. FBI SWAT teams and hostage rescue team personnel from field offices across the region were deployed. Local law enforcement, carefully vetted officers who were not part of the investigation, were brought in to assist where necessary. The simultaneity was intentional. Federal investigators had spent months ensuring that no single arrest would tip off the others before all targets were in custody. Communications between suspects had been monitored continuously in the weeks leading up to the operation. By 8 a.m. on October 30th, all primary targets were in federal custody. FBI Deputy Director Andrew Bailey flew to Mississippi personally for the announcement. Standing at the press conference in Oxford, he was direct. We're talking about 14 current or former law enforcement officers who are alleged to have sold out the public, promoted crimes they should have been investigating and stopping, and instead of working to stem the flow of dangerous controlled substances, the evidence will show they took bribes to facilitate the distribution of those substances. They betrayed the trust that the public placed in them. They disgraced the badge. U.S. Attorney Clay Joyner called it a monumental betrayal of public trust. The FBI's special agent in charge of the Jackson Field Office, Robert Eichhoff, added context that cut deeper than the legal language. Just weeks earlier, a mass shooting had killed 9 people and wounded a dozen more during homecoming celebrations in the Delta. When agents responded, they encountered communities who did not trust law enforcement to help them. We learned of the community's distrust of select law enforcement officers due to concerns of corruption, Eichhoff said. Law enforcement is only effective when the communities they protect can trust that law enforcement officers are honest. The corruption had not just facilitated drug trafficking, it had eroded the basic compact between police and the people they were supposed to serve, and that erosion had left communities defenseless at the worst possible moment. For the residents of the Mississippi Delta, the arrests were confirmation of something many had long suspected and few had been able to prove. When the drug dealers who first tipped off the FBI described paying for protection, they weren't describing something unusual. They were describing the system as it had existed, in their experience, for years. The bribery wasn't an aberration. It was the cost of doing business in certain counties. That means every legitimate crime victim in those counties. Every person who called 911, every family that needed help, every community member who tried to report drug activity was potentially calling law enforcement that was on the payroll of the people they were reporting. This is the hidden cost of police corruption that never makes the indictment. It's not just the drugs that moved. It's the crimes that didn't get solved, the evidence that went missing, the cases that were never opened, the people who gave up on asking for help because they'd learned that help wasn't coming. Your tax dollars paid the salaries of these officers. Your government funded the departments that protected cartel cocaine shipments, and the communities that needed protection most, already among the most vulnerable in America, paid the highest price. What happened in the Mississippi Delta is not unique. It is extreme. It is documented, but it is not unique. In 2024, former Hinds County Sheriff Marcian Chrysler was convicted of accepting bribes and providing ammunition to a convicted felon. In 2023, 6 Rankin County officers pleaded guilty to federal charges for the torture of 2 black men, a case that triggered a full DOJ investigation into that sheriff's office. In 2019, a former Tallahatchie County sheriff was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for extorting bribes from a drug dealer. Mississippi has been a recurring site of federal law enforcement corruption prosecutions for over a decade, but the October 2025 case is different in scale and in what it reveals about the depth of cartel penetration. These were not officers accepting small payments to look the other way. They were providing armed convoy escort with guns, with badges, with marked vehicles for drug shipments on American highways. The Sinaloa cartel's ability to recruit American law enforcement as operational assets represents a new level of infiltration. The FBI's willingness to run a 30-month undercover operation to document it and to take down sheriffs, chiefs, and deputies simultaneously represents the kind of institutional response the moment demands. October 2025. Ongoing. As of the indictment unsealing on October 30, 2025, all 20 defendants faced federal charges. Of the original 22 names on the indictments, 2 had charges dropped at the press conference. Prosecutors confirmed their cases did not meet the evidentiary threshold for prosecution. The remaining 20 defendants face counts including conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, bribery of public officials, and carrying a firearm during a drug trafficking crime. The firearm charge alone carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years in federal prison, stacked on top of any narcotic sentence. Sheriff Milton Gaston and Sheriff Bruce Williams, both elected officials, were suspended from their positions pending resolution of the criminal matter. Their counties were placed under emergency administrative oversight by the state. Federal prosecutors indicated the investigation remains active. The case, built over 30 months of undercover operations, is expected to produce additional charges as investigators continue to analyze financial records, communications, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. The FBI made clear, this is not the end. It is the beginning of a reckoning. March 8, 2023. A convoy rolls south on Highway 61 in the dead of night. Marked police vehicles, flashing lights, uniformed officers, escorting 25 kilograms of cocaine for a cartel. Not because they were forced to, because they chose to, because someone handed them cash and they decided that was enough. 2.5 years later, the FBI closed the trap. 14 officers arrested, 2 sitting sheriffs in handcuffs, 10 agencies exposed. A 30-month undercover operation that documented, in real time on camera, what corruption at the highest levels of local law enforcement actually looks like. This case matters beyond Mississippi. It is a reminder that the badge is only as good as the person wearing it, and that when those people fail, it is always the most vulnerable communities that pay the price. Always. The FBI agents who ran this operation for 30 months, who documented every convoy, every payment, every Miami trip, they are the reason this story ends with arrests instead of impunity. This is what accountability looks like when the system actually works. Pride of America exists to document exactly this: the failures, the corruption, and the people who fight to hold the line. If this story moved you, if you believe this kind of accountability journalism matters, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with every American you know. Drop a comment below. Were you shocked that this reached sitting sheriffs, or does this confirm what you already suspected? The truth is out there. We'll keep finding it. See you in the next one.